So nice to have a full chapel here with our neighbors from the area. We have members from the Shalom Catholic community who are in Cambridge at St. Anthony and St. Francis Parish. They're also gathering for a retreat this coming week, and also members of St. Anthony's Parish in Cambridge. I'd like to thank David for serving, and Ilda from the Shalom community for our readings. Speaking of St. Anthony, we celebrate a St. Anthony today, not the one that I'm more familiar with. St. Anthony, of course, who was born in Lisbon but died in Padua. However, there's a connection between the two, interestingly enough. So I'm going to talk about that naturally, as you would imagine. Before St. Anthony became a Franciscan, he was an Augustinian. And he started in Lisbon, went to Coimbra. And in the city of Coimbra, which is a university city, there's a chapel of the Holy Cross. And he was assigned there as an Augustinian. And during the time that he was there, some relics of Franciscan martyrs who had been burned to death in Morocco came to the city. And he was so moved that he would go to the chapel of the Franciscans on the top of the hill and pray there. As it happened, the name of that chapel was dedicated to Santo Antão. In Portuguese, there's a difference between St. Anthony of Lisbon, Santo Antônio, and St. Anthony of the Desert, Santo Antão. Both the same name, however. So he was so moved by his prayer and moved by that location and the presence of Franciscans that when he became a Franciscan, guess whose name he took? Antonio, the abbot. And so there's a strong connection between the memorial that we celebrate today and the patron saint of my parish. St. Anthony, the abbot, tried to be a hermit. He wasn't the first monastic. He wasn't the first man to go off and live in caves and deserts. Maybe the first one to live in a desert. But he is known as the father of monks because of the determination that he had to live a life without possessions. Now, Anthony had a sister, and the family was in Egypt. And his family had some wealth. They had a lot of property. His parents died when he was 18 or 20 years old, which is pretty young, although in those days it was probably middle age. At any rate, not for him, because he was 105 when he died. So he was just a kid at 18 or 20, as nowadays. His parents left everything to him naturally. And so, because he had read the gospel that we heard today, when Jesus says, give up your possessions, he sold everything except saving enough for his sister and himself to survive. And as he continued to read this gospel, if you wish to be perfect, go sell everything that you have. And also reading in Matthew, let tomorrow take care of itself. He decided to give away everything else. And so I don't know if she was very pleased about it, because Athanasius doesn't tell us much about his sister, but he sent her to a convent, and he went to live in caves, to pray, to be close to Jesus Christ, to do what Jesus said. Sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. What are you willing to give up to follow Jesus? What are we willing to give up to follow Christ, to be Jesus in the world? We're so possessed by our possessions, aren't we? That before Mass, we're all looking at our cell phones, wondering what's going on in the world, or who tweeted me, or who tweeted something. We know someone has. Maybe not for us. We're possessed by our cars, by our homes. We have to have the perfect kitchen, the perfect family room. We put everything into that. How often do we think about the poor? How often do we think about refugees? How often do we think about those who need our help? You know, this really isn't about the refugees that we're often thinking about, but I read an article last night, and you know that the fires that are devastating Australia are really horrible, and millions of animals or wildlife has died. I don't know if you know what a wombat is. I can't explain it to you. It's a little furry creature. And they live in caves throughout the underground wherever they live. And they have been sheltering their neighboring refugee animals. There have been different kinds of animals, like the spiny anteater, I forget the name of it. It looks like a porcupine. All these other animals, snakes and serpents and lizards, have been living in the caves, being protected by the fire. Now, obviously, the wombat isn't giving up anything. It's just opening its home to other people. I mean, other creatures who are different from itself. So often we close ourselves off to our brothers and sisters because of the language that they speak, the color of their skin, where they come from, the creed that they believe in. Jesus tells us, give up your possessions, those things that you hold most dear, your prejudices, your biases sometimes. Sometimes we hold on to those as if they're wealth. Jesus says, give them away. Give all those things away that are possessing you, that you might be perfect. You know, I'm not perfect. And many of my parishioners would probably tell you. My mother would have been the first to tell you that I wasn't perfect. God love her. I did. Because she made me humble. And sometimes it's good to realize our imperfections. It's probably better to learn them on ourselves than to have other people tell us, but nevertheless, sometimes we need to hear that. Jesus told the young man what he needed to have life. He didn't say to have eternal life. If you wish to enter into life, keep the commandments. I don't know anyone that doesn't want to get to heaven so far, thank goodness. But Jesus tells us quite clearly what we need to do. Keep the commandments, which he summarizes for us so easily. Love God before all things and love your neighbor as he has loved us. And his love is death on the cross. And so what am I willing to give up? To love God, to follow Jesus, and to love my brother and sister in the world, to do all that I can to help lift them up, to give them peace and comfort, and to show them love.